There was a sage by the name of Madhuswami Dikshitar, born in South India in the 1700s. He was a musician and an astrologer, and he wrote the famous Navagrahas. Nava means 9. We're studying the 9 planets of Vedic astrology, grahas, the planets. So he wrote those famous songs for each planet called Navagrahas. This translation is taken from many different descriptions of Brihaspati. The first one is, I meditate on Brihaspati, the husband of the goddess Tara. You are the ruler of Sagittarius and Pisces. You confer many blessings. You are mighty, strong, pervasive, and a brilliant intellect. Your friends are the Sun, Moon, and Mars, but you can be at odds with Venus and Mercury. So within this first part of Dikshitar's glorification of Jupiter, we see so many descriptions of Jupiter. In his songs, you practically get every description that you need. So you may look up Dikshitar on the internet and look at his Graha songs and try to get some better understanding of the planets. In any case, Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius and Pisces. And what does he do? He's guru. What is the job of the guru? The job of the guru is to teach. And by teaching others, he confers his blessings. And those blessings are meant to give you a deeper understanding. So Jupiter is the main guru or primary guru within the universe. As far as being a controller of a planet, is the guru of the planets. He's the planet of, or the energy of blessings. And he's mighty, strong, and pervasive. So he's large. Jupiter is a large planet. Jupiter is one of the biggest planets, or the biggest planet in our solar system, the largest planet. So Jupiter. So anytime you see Jupiter in the chart, you know it stands for something great, something big. It usually has to do with wealth. That's one of the key words of Jupiter. So if one has a well-placed Jupiter in the chart, it could mean that they're able to accumulate vast amounts of money. Not in all cases. We have to look at the other planets, but just Jupiter on its own confers those blessings, not just in wealth, in knowledge. That's the other key word, knowledge. So one who has a good Jupiter in their chart, they may be very knowledgeable in some regard. So its friends are the Sun, Moon, and Mars, usually other fiery planets. The moon is considered in there because it reflects the light of the sun, so it's also considered fiery in that regard. It is a water planet, though, and can be at odds with Venus and Mercury. That means Venus and Mercury are not his friends. They have different agendas, whereas Brihaspati is more like expansion of knowledge and wealth. Venus is an expansion of enjoyment, luxury, art, and beauty. They're really not on the same page, although Venus, a well-placed Venus in a chart, could also mean having riches or money. So both those planets are basically planets of money and wealth. Mercury is a planet of intelligence. Mercury is just concerned with cerebral things, learning and communicating. Mercury is an earth planet. It represents the earth element. Venus represents the earth element. Jupiter represents the fire element. There are different types of planetary energies. So here we have a depiction of Jupiter. He may or may not look like that, but that's someone's depiction. Jupiter here is holding a sword and a lotus flower. The sword representing the sword of knowledge, and the lotus flower representing peace and wisdom. So Jupiter is also the planet of wisdom. So we already talked about some of these different descriptions of Jupiter. Jupiter is known as the greater benefic planet. Saturn's known as the greater malefic, and we'll talk about Saturn in a minute. The key word, like we discussed before, is wealth. That could be wealth in money, that could be wealth in wisdom, or wealth in knowledge. So Jupiter just means expansion or greater things. So wealth, wisdom, knowledge, these are some things everybody needs or wants. So it rules two houses. Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius, and Jupiter is the ruler of Pisces. That could be a little bit confusing for those who have some knowledge of Western astrology, because Pisces is ruled by Neptune in Western astrology. In Vedic astrology, it is Jupiter, and we're going to stay with Jupiter on that. So, two types of expansion: creative manifestation in Sagittarius and creative energy in Pisces. It represents the 9th and the 12th houses. Well placed in the chart, it will promote awareness, harmony, intelligence, and balance. If not well placed in the chart, could cause greed issues. Jupiter is the planet of children and also of the spouse, or the male spouse, or the husband, and may cause overexpansion in certain areas. It may also represent knowledge, cosmic energy, law, spiritual teacher, the guru, dharma, religion, education, abundance, children, and health. So let's go on to an example of Jupiter in the chart. All right, so here you see a South Indian Vedic chart. We start at the first house, or the ascendant. In this case, we're just doing this using the first house as Taurus, or Taurus rising. It's known as the Lagna in Vedic astrology. In Vedic astrology, we start with Aries and we move to the right, we move forward. In Western astrology, they will move the other direction. But ours makes logical sense. We're just moving house by house to the right. In most languages, we write left to right. We're moving in a clockwise direction. The chart examples that I show use the South Indian chart. I think it's the best for illustration. It's the best way to read a chart. There's another type of chart, the North Indian chart, which can be also used. We'll go into that later in other lessons. So we're going to talk about a Taurus rising because planets located within the houses or within the signs for different rising signs act differently. So I think I mentioned before, you just can't give a carte blanche description of a planet being in a certain house and say that is the way that planet operates. So in this case, we're looking at Jupiter. So we have Jupiter in Gemini. Jupiter's right here. Jupiter in Gemini at 15 degrees, 39 seconds. So my question here, is Jupiter hurting or helping this chart? So we say that Jupiter has a benefic influence. It is a benefic planet. But in this case, for a Taurus rising with Jupiter in Gemini, is Jupiter, the tendency, I should say, of Jupiter, is it going to have a positive effect in the chart? So there's certain ways that we're able to, certain techniques that we're going to use and able to analyze the different planets. We may be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves right now because we haven't learned about the signs and the houses and the significance of those. But just to give you an example of a Jupiter in Gemini. Before I had mentioned that Jupiter is friends with the Sun, it's friends with Mars, and it's friends with the Moon. Its enemies are Mercury and its enemies are Venus. So we see two things right away that pop out. We see Jupiter and Venus together conjunct. So would you think that Jupiter and Venus together would be such a hot combination? Now they're both benefic planets, so in a sense that helps out the sign of Gemini, having two benefics in that placement. These planets are enemies with one another and they're conjunct. So you can look at it like this. Say you have two enemies sitting in the same room and they're sitting on the sofa together. That's not going to promote too much goodwill. They're going to be looking at each other, giving each other the evil eye. So in this case, Venus and Jupiter are not exactly happy. They have to sit on the same place together. So that's one thing. Also, we're going to look at Jupiter in Gemini. Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So it's Mercury sign. Mercury owns Gemini. So we have Jupiter in a place that Mercury owns. Again, Mercury itself is not a friend of Jupiter. So Jupiter is in a place where it really doesn't need to stick its nose in. It's none of its business being in a sign like that. It has a different agenda. It doesn't have a mercurial agenda. Mercury is earth, Jupiter is fire. So Jupiter's like inspiration, and Mercury is say more earthbound, concerned with things of the material world like business and money. So I would think all in all, just looking at it, giving, a quick bird's eye, or a snapshot view of Jupiter here, I would think that Jupiter is not so well placed. But we have other things taken consideration. Look here. We have Mars and we have the Sun. Mars and the Sun are friends of Jupiter. So it is in a house with its friends. So it feels comfortable because its friends are there, but it's sitting on a sofa, say, for example, with its enemy, Venus. And it's in a place or a house owned by Mercury. So all in all, it has some support, from Mars and Jupiter, so it can feel, secure in a sense. But it's in a place that it's not really welcome. So it's kind of a mixed bag there. So is Jupiter hurting or helping in this chart? There's many more things to look at. I'm going quickly over these things. We'll cover these things more in detail as we move on. But Jupiter is in the second house. The second house is a house of wealth. It's a house of money and security. So to have a planet like Venus or Jupiter in a house of wealth is a good thing. So there's lots of pluses and lots of minuses. You really need to take notes and write down these things. What would be your synopsis of Jupiter in the second house? Jupiter in the second house is considered very good, but it's in a house that's owned by Mercury. It's occupied by Venus, its enemy, but it has Mars and the Sun as its support. And we also have to look at the places Jupiter owns, and that gives us some information of the type of Jupiter we're talking about. So Jupiter rules Sagittarius. Jupiter rules Pisces. Here is your 8th house, and here is 11th house. 8th house is a difficult house, but it's also a house of finance, or a house of wealth also. Usually that wealth comes from others. It could come from the spouse, from the 7th house. It could come from inheritance, from gambling, or banks or investments. The 11th house here up top of Pisces is a house of gains. That could be gains from friends, gains in friends, awards, titles, also from the career. Here's the career house. The career house is next door here, the 10th house. So it could be gains from the career. So we have the house of gains, the house of inheritance. The ruler of those two houses sits in the second house of wealth, a wealth house, I should say. So it's looking fairly positive. There will be some wealth involved having Jupiter in that house, the ruler of two other money houses, gains houses, or finance houses, sitting in this house. So it looks good for finances for this person throughout their life, especially when they get into a Jupiter period. But there's more. There's more that meets the eye here, but that's kind of an indication. The ruler of the first in the second house too. So that's more indication. This person may be involved in Venusian things that bring them money. That's just a quick analysis. There's many more things to look at. I put another ascendant sign here. This time we have a Sagittarius rising. So is Jupiter hurting or helping in this chart? So we already went through the Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Sun conjunction. That's a heavy conjunction. That's all in here. In this chart, it's in the 7th house. 7th house is the house of marriage. a house of partnership, a house of business. So it tells you something about this particular person who's a Sagittarius rising. So we have ruler of the first in the seventh. First house is ruler of the self. The first house looks at every other house in the chart. Plus it's looking in a straight line to the seventh. It's aspecting that seventh house very strongly, the ruler of the first. So it's a ruler of the first. And Pisces, ruler of the fourth, house of the home and the mother, in the fourth house, in the seventh house, I'm sorry. In this chart, if you're born a Sag rising and you have all these planets here, you have a lot going on in this area of relationship. But then we have this Saturn down here. I don't know about that. That doesn't look real good to me. Let's move on. Let's move over to Saturn. See what's going on with Saturn.